Hey mate. Hey mate. Do you want to talk about our feelings?
No. So I'm doing my bookkeeping course.
Okay, what if I invited your entire family over? Would you want to talk about your feelings then?
No, that sounds much worse.
Okay, would you want to talk about your feelings if I showed you this gun?
Oh, Jesus Christ, what the f***? Hello, I am Adam from Phenomenerds, and welcome to another episode of Board Game History, looking at the weird and interesting tales from games from the annals of board gaming, lol, annals. This time we're going to be talking about our feelings, our emotions, and about the UnGame, or the UnGame to the layman. First of all, what kind of title is that, you ask? Well, it's actually very apt, because the UnGame isn't really a game, but it's also kind of wonderful, and gamers hate it. An interesting tale then, especially considering that it's a game all about speaking that was born of silence. The UnGame was invented by Ria Zakic in the early 1970s. It says on the box it's suitable for ages 5 to 105, so anyone who's 106 watching this, you can f*** off. You can f*** off. Ria was a child of the 30s and 40s, coming out of the Great Depression, one of the biggest periods of financial hardship and national psychological anguish in US history. Life was hard enough without talking about feelings, which we might recognise now as a snake that eats its own tail, but back then, as Zakic herself said, if you had a job, you just were glad. People didn't search for pleasure so much, it was just survival. After growing up in a time where getting on with it and getting by were the national moods, Zakic was a 35-year-old mother of two in 1970 when she got some bad medical news. She was found to have several polyps on her vocal cords. Polyps are small, abnormal tissue growth, little bumps that grow in unusual places and, if left unchecked, can develop into cancer. So obviously, out they come. However, because the surgery was happening on the vocal cords, that carries the risk of permanent damage. So after the procedure, the doctors told Ria not to speak, literally make no sound at all for months, because the slightest noise could cause bleeding on her vocal cords and could result in her losing the power of speech permanently. What happened next shocked her. She became completely invisible to the people around her, because people weren't comfortable talking to someone who couldn't talk back. People stopped talking to her entirely. She realised you don't know what you got till it's gone, and that while she had been able to speak, all that she had actually said to her children were directions: do this, don't do that, and speaking to her husband was equally surface layer: how was your day, how's your boss? In the long reflective silence that Ria now found herself trapped inside, she became acutely aware of all the stuff she wished she'd been able to ask, and also what her family could ask her. So one day, Ria sat down and mapped out what would become the UnGame. So, how'd you play it? There have been multiple versions of the UnGame over the decades with different board layouts. Some versions are just packs of cards in a box, but this is the edition I was able to grab off eBay. So you've got this board that takes the form of an infinite loop. Before the game starts, you set how long you want it to last. Half an hour, because there's no in-game end state, you can keep going forever. Also, decide which deck of cards you'll be using. On these cards are topics that people will be talking about. You've got 1 cards, and you've also got 2 cards. Much like the universal toilet code, number 1s are more light-hearted, number 2s are more serious and involved. You can use one deck or mix them up, much like the game length, it's your call. On your turn, you roll the dice and move your piece. If you land on an UnGame space, take a card from the top of the pile and read it out loud. Now, it could say, what was your favourite TV programme when you were younger? Why did you like it? or it could say something a little more serious, like when and where do you feel the most relaxed and peaceful? Then you talk about it for a few sentences, maybe half a minute, maybe more, but normally around there, which brings us to the most important rule of the UnGame, which is this: nobody talks when it is your turn. Nobody talks after it is your turn. People can make notes, but after you have said your piece, there's no feedback. Play passes immediately to the next player. If you land on a comment space instead, then instead of taking a card, you can use this opportunity to comment on something that someone has already said, or ask them a question about it. I feel that it's interesting that you feel that way because I feel this way, or could you say more about what you meant when you said, etc. The third type of space to land on asks a player if they felt a certain emotion recently, and if so, to go to one of the cheesily named places on the board: the Worry Wharf, the Fearful Forest, Mighty Mountain. What happened next changed her family forever. Her children started talking about being teased at school and being terrified of letting their grades slip, something the parents knew nothing about. Her husband spoke about how lonely he felt not being able to hear his wife's voice, even in that stoic household. There was clearly something there, something different in the game, something with the power to do real good. Off, said the board game companies that she pitched the UnGame to. People don't want to talk about their feelings, and how can it be a game if you can't win? It looked like the game was dead and buried for a while until a chance discovery of a half-finished board in Ria's dustbin by one of her neighbour's kids. The child took the board to his parents, who then approached Ria saying, "We want to sell this game." The neighbours remortgaged their home and set up the UnGame company to print and distribute the game. 10 years later, it sold over 1 million copies as it rode on the psychological shift that was taking place in the American psyche during the 1970s. People were moving away from the buttoned-down repression of the decades previous and discovering the curative powers of expression and also drugs. Lots of them. Here's some. Yum yum. That ink tastes bad. Copies of the game have been sold to psychologists, family therapists, marriage counsellors, teachers, senior citizen groups. It's used in substance addiction programs. Ria herself has received hundreds of letters detailing saved marriages, families talking like they never had, mental health patients making progress because of it. Isn't that wonderful? A nice, uncomplicated board game success story. Apart from the fact that everyone hates this f***ing game. Now, don't get me wrong, hobby gamers aren't more opinionated than other hobbyists. I mean, we've spoken in previous videos about a visceral reaction people have to Monopoly, but Monopoly is a mean-spirited game about capital, greed, and dismustachioed wanker. The UnGame has been credited by some families as a joyous bonding tool, and gamers hate it so much more than Monopoly. Monopoly has a 4.4 on Board Game Geek, the board gaming equivalent of IMDb. The UnGame has 2.8. It's one of the lowest scores of a mass-market, decades-old, million-selling game of all time. And I went through some of the user reviews and listened to some of these. I still have nightmares about this game. I was forced to play this as a child and never recovered. I'd rather see it burned and sent back to hell where it came from. A product of American navel gazing from a decade ago that saw us go from being a flawed national community to simply a nation of self-absorbed hustler robots. Would rather spend my time whacking my hand with a wooden mallet. As a game, it's a 0. As an exercise in icky interpersonal dynamics, it's at least a 4. This one's just a picture of someone burning the UnGame on a barbecue. Underneath it says, UnGame really starting to warm up, and that actually is quite funny. A game with no losers is for losers. Almost comedic in its sappiness, almost. A counselling or relationship building tool disguised as a game. It's fine as a tool it's built to be, but it's not a game. Hot dog. Jumping Frog Albuquerque. Now, these opinions aren't wrong. Sure, a bunch of them seem to be simple dismissals of vulnerability, and the commenters appear to be mistaking that for strength, but it's not for me to say that, which is why I haven't. The rest of the criticisms seem to stem from the UnGame not fitting into the narrow parameters of what makes a game a game. Like it's a Mission Impossible secret agent wearing the face mask of dice and playing pieces to sneak into your homes disguised as fun before a sudden but inevitable betrayal. And sure, if you're being forced to play anything that sucks, and sure, you have to act actively engage with the UnGame on its own terms, which sounds like a flaw. I mean, if you want your friends to chill out, have some beers, and dick around, don't bring out the UnGame. But in the same way, you shouldn't bring out Twilight Imperium, one of the most classically acclaimed games. You know, everyone put down your beers. It's time to learn some rules. I just find it odd that board gamers who think nothing of learning how to play this dog coffin of a game aren't a little more charitable with the idea of investing their time and engagement to try and get the most out of a seemingly off-putting social experiment. That's my diss track to gamers there. Editor James, put Thug Life sunglasses on me. Do it. But it wasn't just hardcore gamers that reacted harshly to this trend of games as therapy. Some academics have talked about the unreality of these communication-based games, that the communication they create is actually distorted, rendered unnatural by the unnatural observational game state. In social sciences, this is known as the Hawthorne effect, the idea that the act of observation of something changes that something's nature. Like, if I tell you, I'm going to watch you in order to measure how many times you fidget, that will change how much you actually want to fidget. And if I do it with this gun, as I conduct most of my experiments, that apparently skews the data even further. Other psychologists, like Dr. Edmund Schimberg, writing for the Philadelphia Inquirer, wrote, "It plays with people's emotions, opening them up wide with no one to close them afterward. It leaves their emotional guts open for their friends and neighbours to see." Although it is worth pointing out, he's not talking about the UnGame there. He's talking about another therapy game that came first, called Group Therapy in 1969. That game features also people talking about difficult topics, but after they're done, players judge them with cards on whether or not their answer was with it or they copped out, which, yes, is a despicable thing to do. Oh, you are really good though. Oh, sorry. So this game comes armed with more massive red flags than a semaphore conference attended entirely by bullfighters. And I cannot deny that by accepted social standards, the UnGame is desperately uncool. Like, I'm going into this with a giant open mind, but right now this game seems like a counsellor who's trying to get through to a kid by sitting backwards on his chair and saying, "Rap with me, Holmes." But I just couldn't bring myself to dismiss it without playing. For a game with this positive an intention, with this positive a backstory, to have received such venom online, I had to try it. Because in this sense, it's already way more interesting than half the games on my shelf. So I assembled 5 friends, Pete, Andy, Tom, Blair and Laurie, and for precisely 1 hour, we played the UnGame. For the first 30 minutes, we would use the light-hearted deck. For the other half, we'd use the good shit. And we kinda loved it. Explaining why will require me to go to a fairly serious place, so if things ever get too heavy, I'll ask James to edit in some lovely footage of Corgis, the world's best dog. So first thing you feel is that this game definitely comes with expectations. The background of the game is as this revelatory turning point in so many families. The idea that this game changes people's lives lends an almost unhelpful intensity to it, which you either let sit over you for a bit or you feel the urge to kind of buck against it, crack jokes, just try and sort of lessen the importance of what you're doing. Regulation is felt a lot in this game, sort of standing beside you, boxing you in, watching you like a man with a notepad. And there are initial frustrations, mostly with the golden rule that you can't talk whenever someone else is, nor can you comment on what they've said when they're done. Now this game encourages you to make notes, but even when you land on a comment space and you can circle back to what someone has said, it's gone. And for a game about emotions, it's frustrating to lose that chance to kind of make a connection with someone.
Like tears in rain.
It is a regimented simulation of a conversation. That's uncanny. And to some, it might seem oppressive, but over time, at least in our playing group, we started to notice how the rules created more opportunity and incentive to talk about ourselves. And this is why saying it's not one of these games purely because there's no standard victory condition feels especially pedantic. It's regulated, interactive entertainment with rules that specifically structure the experience to achieve something. If you roll your eyes at the idea of getting to know your friends and family better being a co-op game victory condition, I'm not gonna be able to convince you otherwise, but genuinely that's how it felt to us playing it. Now, the fact that the main purpose of this game is to talk about yourself is going to seem crass and exposing to a lot of people. I know a lot of people who don't want to talk about their feelings. And the main reason for that is they feel that relatively their lives are fine. They don't want to create undue pity or concern with their peers, or they don't want to burden their peers with their problems. That's understandable. I wish people didn't default to feeling that their problems are other people's burdens, but that getting on with it and getting by narrative is one that a lot of societies create in order to justify some of the harsher realities of those societies. The UnGame does away with all that. Playing this game by these rules and everyone accepting these rules allows you to hopefully silence that voice. The fact that people can't talk, that they're not going to provide you with that instant feedback on what you've said, that you won't get an automatic "oh" or "oh no" or "yeah, I also feel that, but now your turn is over and I will share what I think on the subject." With that taken away, then you can speak your mind, and it's refreshing just to be able to finish a thought and then just let it go. See, you're not burdening anyone with your feelings, because not only do they not have to, but they shouldn't respond to you. So you don't feel like you're obligating your friends to process what you're saying or put an onus on them to try and help you. You're just being heard. And then the moment passes and it's gone. You don't have to dwell on it. You don't have to dwell on the emotions. You just have to feel them, talk about them. All those worries of, oh, my life is relatively fine, so I shouldn't be indulgent, they disappear because the game's rules have created this unnatural, yes, artificial, yes, that also means unnatural, yes, level playing field. Even the stuff that at first glance feels nauseatingly twee, a corporate approximation of personality, Worry Wharf, Mighty Mountain, actually in the game have a pretty useful function. They're like a palate cleanser. Someone spends a minute talking about how alone they feel in lockdown right now, and then on the next player's turn, they're sent to, the desolation desert. And that creates a little burst, a little grin, just enough to frame the experience of, oh yeah, we're rolling dice, we're moving around the board. It kind of brings it back to the comfort of the mundane. Even that frustration of not being able to connect with people as they're talking gradually ebbs away. In a sense, it becomes freeing for yourself to hear people speak because, you only have to hear them. You find yourself able to quiet the voice that normally pipes up while someone's talking.
Oh, I know what they're talking about, so I better start organising my thoughts. So when it's my turn to speak, I've got something to say.
Which distracts you from what they're actually saying. You find yourself almost subconsciously with body language or with visual cues, hurrying them to the end of their thought so that you can chime in with something that you formulated in your own head. In the UnGame, that's all gone and you're left with listening, but actual listening. After decades of social media, of immediacy of response being hardwired into us, in opinions literally being ranked in order of insight and entertainment by likes and retweets and notes and upvotes, and goodness, I'm an old man yelling at a cloud, but honestly, I can't tell you how freeing it is to not feel the pressure of having to immediately have an opinion on something, of being able to just hear it. It's like, when you go to see a movie and it's your job to write a movie review of it afterwards, you're stressed because you're trying to organize your thoughts as you're watching it. You don't feel that here. And when you get past that exposure, that feeling of vulnerability, you start aching for your turn. I mean, something may come up that throws you and makes you feel on the spot and a bit afraid of what you're going to say, but it feels good to talk about yourself. It feels good to be heard. It feels good to share your feelings on a subject and have people know you without having to compromise your feelings or have people comment on what they now know about you. We played for an hour, and then for another full hour, we just sat and talked about the game, what we felt about it, and we noticed that the patterns of gameplay would stay with us. We would wait patiently for people to finish speaking, and then we would talk openly at length without interruption. And that discussion did feel necessary. It does feel like a game that requires a bit of aftercare. It can open you up, make you feel vulnerable, and it's probably best not to immediately head back out into the world. Yeah, cheers for that, everyone. Yeah, absolutely none of us knew our dads. Gotta go make a hot pot, though. Stop crying, Rachel. End video meeting for all. Bye! So yes, big words these. Big thoughts, big feelings. Look, I know that's not why some people play games. I get that. And I don't want to frame the UnGame like it's a turning point, because it wasn't a turning point. It didn't change my life, but it was like a really good massage or a bit of exercise. It was intense in places, but it leaves you feeling vented, a bit more content, a bit softer around the edges. And that's got its own importance, especially now.
But I also don't want to be completely positive about this game, because it has got its own problems. For all it's trying to kind of lighten the mood with the hee everybody wins, don't worry, go to the worry wharf. It is a game that feels encumbered by its own importance, that talking about our feelings is a monumental thing, which is a self-fulfilling prophecy. It is intense. You feel somewhat railroaded by the occasion of the game to lean towards deep and profound answers, almost like you're not playing this game right if you don't try and build towards something revelatory. And that's the Hawthorne effect in perfect practice. You're creating a false impression of a deep and meaningful conversation, and that is a weird sensation. For our group, we had the simple rule that if you didn't want to talk about a subject, you could pass. It only happened once, but the players said that they felt like they were acting against the rest of the team. Like they were concerned that they had just broken the trust of the game, the precious illusion of emotional safety that the game tries to create.
It did feel a bit creepy in places, a little bit voyeuristic. Not necessarily that people are answering probing questions under duress, but certainly unnatural. I would also definitely not describe it as fun. And honestly, if fun is one of your main criteria for a gaming session with your friends, then yeah, that's absolutely valid. I mean, it's games we're talking about. But still, I can't stop thinking about it. Like before the playthrough, I looked through some of these cards and I thought, how can I possibly play this with my family? Say something about support groups, my nice, quiet dad. But after playing it, I do actually feel that these mechanisms take care of you, that they move the game to that helpful place. I might actually take it home for Christmas. Now, I won't do the game a disservice by telling you it will change your life. It could, but hell, a really good game of D&D or Mansions of Madness, Betrayals at House on the Hill, any game where you commit wholeheartedly, allow yourself to be immersed in this unfolding narrative that involves you, your friends, maybe revealing something about you, your friends, and your relationship to your friends and family. By those criteria, the UnGame absolutely deserves to sit on that same shelf as something that I recommend purely on the fact that it is, as one of the people I played it with described it as, an unforgettable tabletop experience. An experience that, like any time you're asked to engage with your feelings, is a lot easier once you actually just start. Pursuing unforgettable tabletop experiences, collecting them, is one of the reasons I'm in this hobby, and I don't know if it's the same for you. Maybe, if we played the UnGame, I would know that. And that is our video about the UnGame. For more board game history and indeed loads of other formats designed to get you into board gaming, please do subscribe to Phenomenerds. It really helps out the channel. We love making these videos, and we'd love you to become a fan and see more of them. Bye, everybody. Hope you have an amazing rest of your day. Love you. Goodbye. Bye.